One shot changed everything. It wasn't luck or chance. It was the deadly precision of the GAU-21, a weapon built for moments just like this. In a high-stakes chase against a Venezuelan cartel drug boat, that single burst of fire turned the tide. What looked like an impossible escape quickly became a lesson in training and power. But how can one weapon carry so much power? And what really happened in those final seconds on the water? Join us as we break down the shot that stunned the cartel and made history. The war against drug cartels has now taken a much darker turn. President Donald Trump recently announced that United States military forces carried out a second strike against violent drug cartels and narco-terrorist groups in the region overseen by Southcom. He described the operation as a kinetic strike, a term used by the military to mean an attack that delivers physical force, often through missiles or bombs. Trump claimed that 3 men, whom he called terrorists, were killed in the latest operation. This was not the first time the president highlighted such actions. Earlier in September, he shared a similar video clip of another boat being destroyed. According to him, that attack targeted members of the Tren de Aragua, a group Washington identified as a foreign terrorist organization. Trump claimed that 11 people were killed in that strike, which he said included no harm to U.S. forces. He also alleged that Tren de Aragua operates under the influence of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. For military observers, these strikes point out the growing overlap between counter-narcotics missions and broader geopolitical struggles. If the U.S. evidence is accurate, the operations show a determination to treat drug cartels as not just criminals, but as threats to national security on the same level as terror groups. Yet without proof, critics argue that such actions risk escalating conflict and pulling Washington into deeper confrontation with Venezuela. Most people have also wondered what was actually used to carry out the strike. The video only shows an explosion, without revealing the platform or weapon involved. Speculation in military circles has pointed to the GAU-21, a heavy machine gun often mounted on helicopters and naval craft, capable of unleashing an intense rate of fire against small boats. An earlier attack against Houthi forces showed just how devastating the weapon could be in action. During said encounter, the crew of a Navy helicopter on routine patrol had no idea they were about to make history. For a while, the Houthi forces had been striking ships in the region with drones, rockets, and explosive boats. That morning, a quiet sweep became a tense intercept. About a quarter of an hour into the sortie, the radar operator spotted something new on the scope. The ANSP 153 units registered a small contact at bearing 045. The return was faint, too small for a jet, too low for a conventional helicopter. The tactical watch tightened immediately. The helicopter's FLIR sensor, an AAS-44 infrared turret, powered up. Infrared optics read heat, able to spot tiny temperature differences at long range. In clear conditions, the sensor could see targets out to 14 nautical miles, about 16 statute miles or 25 kilometers. But the sun had already warmed the horizon, washing out thermal contrast. The screen offered only ghostly traces. The pilot altered height to angle the sensors. A faint thermal smear eventually winked into being. The shipboard radio then used the code word Vampire, Navy shorthand signaling an inbound aerial threat, most likely an unmanned craft. The helicopter peeled off to place itself between the contact and the nearby destroyer, giving the ship an added layer of protection. The sensor track flickered. The FLIR struggled to hold a steady lock because the target's signature kept vanishing into the background heat. Radar was switched from surface search to air-to-air mode to sharpen detection of small aerial threats like loitering drones or cruise missiles. Sea clutter cleared and the contact brightened on the scope. The object began tiny, jittery maneuvers, micro-moves pilots known as classic unmanned attack behavior. The IFF system identifies friend or foe, pinged for a transponder reply and got nothing. No civilian signal, no military code. That silence meant the aircraft was hostile until proven otherwise. The speed readout climbed. The drone was closing fast on the ship. Visual identification finally came through the optics. A slim fuselage, swept wings, and a pointed nose told the crew what the instruments had only hinted at. A Samad 3 class strike drone, a model previously used in maritime attacks. Intelligence had linked that design to earlier Houthi raids. The intent was clear. The unmanned aircraft carried a warhead and was committed to the ship's path. The helicopter relayed a discreet, formal request to the destroyer. Hostile contact confirmed. Request permission to engage. Rules of engagement in maritime air defense require clear authority before weapons are fired to avoid fratricide or civilian harm. The destroyer returned permission at once. Distance collapsed. The drone had roughly 18 seconds of flight time remaining before impact. The crew had to act in a heartbeat. The pilot banked hard. The helicopter dove into a defensive turn, presenting the gunners with the best firing angle. The door-mounted machine gun was readied, a kinetic direct-fire weapon that expends belts of ammunition at high rate to shred incoming airframes. This engagement became a notable one because the attack helicopter, not a shipboard missile battery, had stopped the threat with machine gun rounds. The choice showed the practical need. The drone was small, low and closing fast. Conditions where gimbaled guns, guided by the helicopter's sensors and human marksmanship, can be more effective and faster than vectored missiles. From detection to decision, the timeline was compressed into seconds. The radar pick, the thermal ghost on the screen, the IFF silence, the visual ID, the rules of engagement call, and the ordering of fire, each link mattered. When the gunners opened up, their fire had to be precise enough to break the drone's control surfaces or detonate its payload at a safe distance. The engagement that followed was a clear example of layered maritime defense. Ship and air assets working together, sensors fusing data, humans making split-second judgments, and legacy weapons doing the finishing work. In that brief high-pressure moment, the helicopter crew turned warning lights and quiet radar pips into a solved problem, and into a new chapter in naval aviation tactics. The Seahawk helicopter held steady in the air, positioned between the destroyer and the incoming threat. The door gunner pressed against the fuselage, gripping the handles of the GAU-21 machine gun. His knuckles turned white, but his aim remained firm. Through the optical sight, the target came into view. No longer just a radar blip, it was now a real object, a hostile drone closing fast. The pilot fought crosswinds, keeping the helicopter stable. The drone was just half a mile away, the maximum range of the machine gun. There was no time to move closer. This was their one chance. The gunner steadied his breathing and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-21 roared, firing a burst of tracer rounds that streaked across the sky like burning lines. The first volley missed. The operator shouted corrections, and the pilot nudged the Seahawk forward. The airframe rattled, but held steady as the gunner fired again. This time, the heavy rounds tore through the air at nearly 900 meters per second, ripping into the drone's fuselage and wing. The hit was direct. The enemy aircraft jolted violently, smoke pouring from its frame as its left wing sheared away. It spiraled out of control. The gunner fired another burst to make sure. The SAMAD-3 drone disintegrated mid-air. The pilot's calm report followed. Target destroyed, but the relief was short-lived. New signals flickered onto the radar screen. The Seahawk's electronic warfare suite picked up a suspicious control signal in the S-band, a frequency often used to guide drones. The crew couldn't yet see anything, but the signs were clear. Another attack could already be on its way. Before they could confirm, a piercing alarm filled the cockpit. This wasn't a drone, it was a missile. The threat warning showed it had been launched from the shoreline, moving at more than 2,500 feet per second, over twice the speed of sound. Time to impact, under 8 seconds. The pilot reacted instantly. He yanked the Seahawk into a hard right turn and dropped altitude fast, forcing the missile to adjust its flight path. The crew were slammed against their harnesses as the helicopter shook under the strain. At the same time, the co-pilot activated the countermeasure system. Flares erupted from the Seahawk's sides, blinding fireballs trailing behind, each burning hotter than 2,000 degrees Celsius. The missile bore down, but then abruptly veered away, its sensors tricked by the searing heat. A flash lit the sky as it exploded against one of the flares. The shock wave rattled the helicopter, but it remained in the fight. Even then, the danger wasn't over. Radar detected a small surface contact near the shoreline where the missile had been launched. It was likely a fast boat modified into a mobile firing platform. The Seahawk relayed the data to the USS Gravely before pulling back. keeping visual watch but staying beyond the reach of shoulder-fired weapons. The GAU-21 and other weapons had long proven their brutal force on the battlefield. But in Washington, the debate was shifting. Officials once considered taking American firepower in a different direction, using drones not against terrorists in the Middle East, but against drug cartels in Mexico this time around. The proposal, discussed during the Trump administration, aimed to strike at the heart of the violent organizations that funnel narcotics across the southern border into the United States. 6 people with experience in U.S. military, law enforcement, and intelligence circles confirmed that conversations took place at high levels of government. At the center of those talks was whether armed drones, normally associated with battlefields in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Somalia, could be deployed against cartel operatives, their vehicles, or even storage sites inside Mexican territory. For Washington, the urgency was clear. Cartels were no longer seen as merely criminal organizations. They were increasingly labeled a threat to national security. Their growing role in smuggling fentanyl and methamphetamine into American communities pushed the issue higher on the administration's agenda. Yet the plan carried enormous risks, both diplomatically and politically. The discussions considered 2 main paths. The first involved cooperation with Mexico's government. Joint action was not unprecedented. U.S. agencies had previously worked closely with Mexican forces in operations against traffickers. In this scenario, drones might have been used with Mexico's approval, making the campaign appear as a coordinated strike against organized crime. The second, far more controversial option was unilateral action. This would mean launching strikes without Mexico's knowledge or consent. For some officials, that idea was considered an option of last resort, but it was not ruled out. Such a move would almost certainly spark a diplomatic crisis, raising accusations of violating Mexican sovereignty. At the time, it remained unclear whether U.S. officials had formally pitched the drone strike idea to Mexico. But what made these talks remarkable was their scope. Sources suggested the campaign, if carried out, could involve an unprecedented number of U.S. personnel and would represent the first time American drones were deliberately used to bomb cartel networks. While the strike plans remained unsettled, the U.S. military and the CIA did take tangible steps. Surveillance flights over Mexican territory increased significantly. These missions, approved by Mexico, were designed to gather intelligence and build what insiders called a target deck, a detailed list of possible strike points. That list could have included cartel leaders, armed convoys, storage depots, or even financial hubs used to sustain their operations. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum later confirmed that surveillance activity was underway, but stressed that coordination did not equal submission. Mexico collaborates, but it does not subordinate itself, she told reporters. Once word of the drone strike discussions reached the public, Sheinbaum addressed the issue directly. Speaking at a news conference, she made it clear that Mexico would not support such actions. In her words, military intervention was not the answer to organized crime. The real solution, she argued, was tackling the deeper causes, poverty, corruption, and impunity, while strengthening intelligence-driven policing and lawful arrests. Her response reflected Mexico's long-standing position. Cooperation with the United States on security matters is welcome, but foreign intervention on Mexican soil is unacceptable. The idea of drone strikes on Mexican soil highlights how blurred the line has become between fighting terrorism abroad and tackling organized crime closer to home. For Washington, drug cartels present a growing national security problem as synthetic opioids devastate American communities. For Mexico, however, sovereignty and self-determination remain non-negotiable. With tensions between Nicolas Maduro's government in Venezuela and Washington rising, a sharper question now hangs in the air. What would be the true purpose of sending U.S. armed forces to strike a cartel leader, a drug lab, or any foreign criminal network? Would the mission be to defeat organized crime across an entire nation, or to narrowly dismantle one group Washington labeled as a terrorist organization? As expected, the standoff between the two nations has only deepened. On August 7th, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi offered a $50 million reward for information leading to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's arrest. Since 2020, Maduro has faced U.S. drug trafficking charges, with Bondi calling him one of the world's most powerful traffickers and a threat to U.S. security. Caracas rejected the claims, but within hours, 4,000 U.S. troops were sent to the Caribbean. Soon after, more ships, submarines, and aircraft joined. The sudden escalation shocked many, especially since it followed a prisoner swap and renewed Venezuelan oil exports, exposing deep divisions within the White House over how to handle Maduro. Shortly after the U.S. lethal strike on the cartel boat, Maduro announced that all communication channels with Washington were severed, accusing the United States of threats, bombings, and outright blackmail. He singled out U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, for allegedly promoting war and death. Venezuela's Ministry of Foreign Affairs escalated the dispute further, claiming an American warship had boarded and detained one of its fishing vessels inside the country's exclusive economic zone for 8 hours. The exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, extends up to 200 nautical miles, about 370 kilometers from a nation's coast. While foreign vessels are allowed passage, occupying a ship engaged in economic activity is rare and highly provocative, especially in such a politically charged climate. Even if Washington's goal were limited to dismantling a single organization, history suggests the outcome would fall short. Removing leaders or destroying one network has rarely slowed the drug trade. Organized crime in Latin America has proved resilient, with new cartels often more violent than their predecessors stepping into the vacuum. A fentanyl lab in Mexico, for example, can be rebuilt for around $60,000, the price of a new Tesla. As long as corrupt officials share in the profits, the trade flows on uninterrupted. There is no doubt that the U.S. military has the firepower to shatter criminal groups, level drug complexes, and capture infamous kingpins. Yet such victories amount to little when the deeper structures of organized crime remain untouched. As many analysts and officers note, military triumphs may bring a fleeting sense of success, but they rarely alter the underlying dynamics. Medellin offers a stark example. Over the decades, its residents have lived under shifting groups: the Medellin Cartel, La Terraza, the Gulf Clan, and others. The names keep changing, but the criminal grip endures. The lesson is simple. Bombs and bullets cannot erase organized crime. Attempts to fight cartels as though they were insurgents or terrorists risk serious failure. Politicians may talk about defeating the Sinaloa cartel or Venezuela's Tren de Aragua with the same military strategies once used against ISIS or the FARC. But this comparison is misleading. Insurgent groups pursue political power, cartels seek profit. While guerrillas often relied solely on violence, criminal groups mix violence with bribery. The Latin American phrase plata o plomo, silver or lead, captures this dual strategy. Cartels bribe officials when possible, and when money fails, they turn to bullets. This makes them harder to confront than insurgents, because they seep into the legal economy, law enforcement, politics, and even financial systems. Removing a cartel boss may shake the hierarchy, but the web of corruption remains, ready to support the next successor. Fighting organized crime is not a task for soldiers. It is a mission for investigators, prosecutors, and judges, people who can tackle corruption, trace money, and enforce the rule of law. History shows that even the biggest drug lords, from Pablo Escobar to Chapo Guzman, eventually fall, often with U.S. help. But their downfall never disrupts the global market that sustains the trade. Cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl continue to flow, often cheaper and purer than before. A half-century of crackdowns has failed to dent the supply, and fentanyl's dangers only grow as it mixes with other chemicals like xylazine. Relying on the military may produce flashy headlines, but it cannot deliver lasting results. Worse, it risks deep diplomatic damage. Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, made this clear when she firmly rejected the idea of U.S. intervention. "We cooperate, we collaborate, but there will be no invasion," she said. Military strikes on Mexican soil without consent would shatter trust, poison bilateral relations, and cripple cooperation in other vital areas such as migration. If civilians were killed in such operations, the harm to U.S. credibility would be incalculable. The truth is unavoidable. Military force might topple individual groups, but it cannot dismantle the intricate, corruption-fueled networks that allow organized crime to thrive. That work requires patience, oversight, and a commitment to lawful institutions, not bombs in foreign skies. Thanks for watching. Before you go, click the link on your screen to check out another video. See you there.